Dorianne says, hello, Rabbi, love and miss you. I love and miss you too, Dorianne, and all the other people who are on this Zoom class today. The fifth in the Living in the Time of the Coronavirus series. And just in case you don't know, the first 4 videos are up on the Ohef Sholom Temple YouTube page. So, anyway, so if you want to catch them up, you certainly can. So this is a topic, the topic of illness, death, mourning, and afterlife that I've been thinking about a lot since the time of the virus. Because one of the many things that the virus has impacted is how we care for our ill, how we are able to bury them, how we are able to, before that even, how we're able to say goodbye, how we're able to bury them, or how we are able to mourn them. All of these things are extremely different literally in the last 8 weeks. Sometimes I think we don't really realize like how radically our lives have changed in such a short time, and just the amount of things we're grieving. But in some ways, I think nothing more so than in how we say goodbye to those we love. Really, anybody who's sick with any illness right now, it's different than it was before. So I am going to share the page with you all. And we're going to begin with, let me just make sure I get the right. Here we go. Okay, hopefully you all can see this. You'll write in the chat if you can't. Of course, when I have the paper up, I can't see the chat. But anyway, every week I say, this is a large lesson with a lot of material, and I'm going to do my best to get through it while still, allowing you all to chat when you want to. But this time I really have a lot of material because I realized this really could have been more than one session. So anyway, as we read the following personal experiences, let's think about what feelings each mourner is experiencing on top of the understandable grief of losing their loved one. In what ways does the virus make the dying person even more isolated? How might not being able to say goodbye in person make the loss even more painful? In what ways does mourning at a distance, whether physically separate or via Zoom, make the process harder? In what ways does mourning remotely this way make some things easier? What other coping mechanisms do individuals and families employ, if any? And note the cases where the kindness of strangers, while not mitigating the pain, does facilitate saying goodbye and bringing comfort. So 3 of the 4 examples are actual letters from congregants to me or to Cantor and me that I've, doctored a little bit so that, to protect the innocent. And one is from an article from this past weekend's New York Times. So, dear Rabbi, I wanted you to know that my mother-in-law died on Thursday evening in Ottawa. We do not yet know when the funeral will be held, and it is distressing that we and our children were unable to go to Canada to see her and say goodbye, nor to attend the funeral. They are limiting the number of people who can be present at a funeral to a total of 10, including the pallbearers, the family, and the officiant. So right there, what comes up for this family or the daughter-in-law who's writing to me? I mean, you can tell right away, that there's an added layer of heaviness and grief on top of just the pain of the loss. They were not able to say goodbye in person because nobody could travel. They were not able to attend the funeral in person, although it was done via Zoom. I can't tell if is this a chat thing? Yeah, let's see here. Okay, yes, you can always write in the in the chat. Yes, the loss is compounded by variables she cannot control. Exactly. In a time when you already feel helpless, you have even more helplessness. And so much of comfort is being present, physically present, being in your loved one's presence, talking to them, whether or not they are conscious, believing that they actually hear what we are saying, holding them. No, somebody wrote no hugs, holding a hand, kissing a forehead, hugging them. All of these things obviously cannot be done. I don't want to say that this particular case had a happy ending, but the Zoom did enable people from all over the world to be together for the funeral in a way that they would not have been able to do with, if the service had not been via Zoom, and they were able to stay on the Zoom call long after the service so that they could all visit. And that they found very healing. So that could be, that is, if there is a silver lining, that is a silver lining. Okay, this next one, yes, please, if you have any questions or comments, please type them in the chat. That'd be great. This is from an article from the New York Times, and it's a true story, but the guy is a comedian. His name is Eitan Levine, and he says, "Burying my bubby during the pandemic." So some of you may have seen this. I'll read through it relatively quickly. One Sunday afternoon a month ago, my mother put me on a conference call with a nurse who explained exactly how we were going to say goodbye to my grandmother, Bubby. She was dying of the coronavirus. I'm going to go in her room, place the phone by her ear, and then you can have a moment with her, the nurse said. Does that sound okay? Yes, thank you, I said. Okay, I'm going to put you on hold now while I put on PPE, she said, referring to personal protective equipment. The nurse got back on the phone and told us she had placed the receiver by Bubby. I listened as my mother said the Shema for Bubby to hear one last time. I told her I was sorry that she had to go like this. I said I loved her, cried a lot, told her I loved her again, said she was the smartest person I ever met, and then heard my mom say, "We'll never forget all the lessons you told us." We thanked the nurse for taking the time to extend our family this courtesy in the height of the pandemic. Then the call ended and I was alone again in my New York apartment, miles away from a family I hadn't seen in months, isolated, wiping tears off my face with a t-shirt I had next to my bed. I wasn't even wearing pants when it all happened. The call woke me up, so I was still in bed without pants on. Right before I answered the call, I ran to put a shirt on because I thought it would be a nice thing for Bubby, like she would have wanted me to say goodbye with at least a button-down shirt on. This baseless Shiva logic I was inventing on the spot manifested itself after the burial in little things, like how I would force myself to get up before 11 a.m. every day and not smoke pot until after 5 p.m. during the week of mourning, because I thought that's probably when people would be paying their respects the most to my mom, and it would be a nice thing for Bubby if I didn't get high during work hours. You're welcome, God. And then I learned that having a loved one die of the coronavirus is a logistics nightmare. When we got to the cemetery, we had to wait in a line of 9 other hearses. Then when we finally got to the grave, we realized that nobody from our family had identified the body, just the people at the hospital where she passed. Without going into a lecture on the Jewish laws of burial, let me just say, identifying bodies is an important part of the process, but we couldn't open the coffin for fear of infection. So after a long debate, the rabbi shrugged and decided that the show must go on. We were then instructed to wait in our cars as a bunch of workers in hazmat uniforms took her coffin from the hearse, walked it over to her plot, and placed it in the ground, like it was that scene in HBO's Chernobyl where they buried the firefighter first responders. Bubby was a confident, brilliant, cunning, and extraordinarily resilient. When she passed, New York One called her a Holocaust heroine because in Auschwitz she saved lives by hiding stolen food between her legs and sneaking it back to her barracks for weaker prisoners. She also supposedly won a beauty pageant on the Holocaust refugee boat she took from Europe to America and was the elegant kind of lady who had an oil painting of herself hanging in the living room. The ending of the funeral was as screwed up as the rest of it. There's a Jewish tradition where the family doesn't leave the cemetery until the coffin is fully covered. Usually the family gets the cemetery gravediggers to help, but because of social distancing, we had to bury the coffin ourselves. And because I was the only one who could physically do it, I had to bury my bubby alone. I shoveled dirt for 8 minutes straight and so concluded what I'm pretty sure was my bubby's funeral. The coronavirus has been wiping out a generation of Holocaust survivors who are saying goodbye and subsequently being eulogized over Zoom meetings hosted by people who don't know how to work front-facing cameras or mute loud participants. It's unfair, heartbreaking, and kind of quirky. While I haven't felt guilty for laughing at this stuff, I've also had a lot of guilt for not feeling guilty enough. And that's the right Jewish response, I think. Like so many of the other bad things to happen to the tribe, the coronavirus is a deep, dark life lesson in how to experience something awful while quietly leaning over to your neighbor and whispering, "Can you believe these schmucks?" So let's go back to the questions that I posed at the beginning. What feelings is each mourner experiencing on top of the understandable grief of losing his loved one? You can just type some, if you want, you can type some answers in the chat, and if not, I'll just answer. Certainly guilt, yes. I think even though he shrouds it in humor, I think that there's a lot of grief there as well. Anger, yes, I agree. Definitely anger, a sense of the upside downness of these times, absurdity. We feel like we missed the mark in failing to give the deceased what they deserve, confusion and disrespect for the process, frustration, loneliness. Exactly. To me, the humor is the biggest honor of love. It helps the pain. I agree with that. That is from iPad number 6. I don't know who that is, but disbelief that this is happening. Exactly. Notice, like, even the call from his mom came in the middle of the night when he was sleeping, right? The whole thing feels so surreal, just like this whole experience of the coronavirus, but it's compounded, thank you, Joyce, compounded by not being able to be there in person. And clearly for this guy, his bubby was like the person he loved the most in the world. So it's just very, very hard. I took out an entire section about how, Bubby's rabbi couldn't do it and their rabbi wasn't available, so they got to rent a rabbi and the guy didn't know who she was, and he conducted this service. The eulogy was like a Holocaust Mad Libs. We're here to bury fill in the blank, who died of fill in the blank, and everything he filled in was wrong. So there was that on top of it. But the only silver lining, loss of ritual, powerlessness, the only silver lining, I think, is the kindness of this nurse who took the time in the midst of her own really, grief and tragedy to actually, call the family, put on the PPE, go into the room, put the phone by Bubby's ear, etc. So, thank God for the kindness of strangers. Okay, a couple more, much, much shorter. These ones are also from real congregants. Dear Roz, I want to thank you for your love and friendship since you arrived in Tidewater. Your funeral ceremony for my wife was wonderful. So many lovely comments from my family and friends about how you portrayed her life and unique qualities. Now here it comes. It's a shame we had to deal with COVID-19 and the limited hugs, kisses, touching, a very sterile aura to a sensitive ceremony. I can imagine how difficult it is for you to conduct a funeral wearing a mask and performing the ceremony to a family of masked relatives 6 feet apart, especially for hearing impaired people. There were their immediate family had hearing impaired people, which the mask makes it that much harder because it muffles everything. The mask clearly impairs the ability of hearing impaired people in reading facial expressions and the emotions of the speaker. As well, you obviously had little feedback from the audience, nor could you see the effect of your words on the audience. Like performing to an empty auditorium is a very eerie feeling and very difficult to project one's feelings into the words. My nephew, one of the many family and friends who participated in the service via Zoom, was previously a television producer who made the observation that the ceremony seemed like a very well done radio presentation. He really loved it, however, and was very complimentary and most appreciative of how it was conducted under the circumstances. The Zoom Shiva went extremely well, and we did have feelings of intimacy despite lack of physical presence. The obvious advantage of not having to travel to Virginia Beach for Shiva was evident since we had participation by family and friends from all over, including my cousins in Jerusalem. Many of those folks would never have been able to participate in the traditional Shiva, and the experience sparked the promise to have more frequent family meetings by Zoom. In any case, I believe she had a good send-off, and we are all relieved that her suffering is over. And I'll share this one as well. Dear Rabbi Rosenkander Jen, my family is very grateful for what you did for us on such short notice. In this sad, crazy, stressful, confusing time, the service and memory of my father allowed our family and friends to get together, to share sweet memories, to feel closer to each other, and to pay our final respects according to Jewish law. God bless you and thank you. So, so a couple of additional layers of grief and feelings added by all of the constraints of the virus, right? You know, you can't even stand near your other mourners. Everybody was wearing face masks and gloves. It's just, you know, you can't read people's facial expressions. You can barely see their eyes for eye contact, etc. Just looking to see a few of these. Yeah, somebody is saying that, actually it's not a secret, but that they, that a friend of theirs died when they were living in Jerusalem, and because they couldn't go back for the funeral, come back home for the funeral, that made the grieving process much more difficult, you know, harder to believe that the person was actually gone, harder to process, harder to get over. Did I read the article about the Jewish nurse who recites Vidui for Jewish patients? I don't believe I did see that. If you could share that, Barbara, that would be great. Or Liz, if you could make a note, and we'll look for it later. Yes, it's very difficult for us as well. The one that said in such short notice, literally, we got the call one day and they literally wanted the funeral the Zoom funeral, like immediately. Hearing impaired people also rely on reading lips, so it's very difficult with a mask on, yes. And these are just, you know, samples. I mean, we could have so many others, but you know, the last thing that you would want at a funeral is for people to get sick from having attended the funeral, you know, so, which has happened actually to many people. So it is the most difficult of decisions, and you know, the hardest way, I think, to mourn on the one hand. On the other hand, the technology does allow people to participate who would not have been otherwise able to participate. But there's no question that all of this makes that sense of powerlessness, of the absurdity of it all, of the grief, all, you know, all the more difficult. And someone's writing that the article about the nurse who does Vidui is actually a man. So, okay. All right, so I want to look at a few principles around illness, death, and dying. This goes all the way through the afterlife, this lesson. So we'll see how far we can get. If we have to continue next week, we will. So the primary principle in all of this is that Judaism values the sacredness and dignity of every person. This is a text that I'm sure is familiar to all of you. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And God created man in his image. In the image of God He created him male and female. He created them, and then God blessed them, etc. Actually, it's believed that this first human was male and female because he created him, but male and female, he created them. But anyway, that's beside the point. The whole point is this principle of B'Tselem Elohim, of being made in the image of God, is probably one of our most fundamental principles, if not the greatest principle. I would say that and choose life, and the two are inextricably linked, I would say our two guiding principles. So we have many texts that teach us that, even when a person's gravely ill, even when they have, Alzheimer's or dementia, and they're not, clearly they're not exactly the same as they were before, we're still to afford them every dignity. Even when the parent becomes the child, they're still the parent. And I will just share some of these. They say old age, I just put in frailty or illness, but the principles are the same. Cast me not off in my old age. When my strength fails, forsake me not. Meaning we are never to forget about those who are ill, infirm, homebound, older, etc., etc. These are, these come right out of the Torah and rabbinic text. He who welcomes an elder or one who is frail or ill, it is if he welcomed the divine presence. Why is that? Why is it that welcoming, that kindness shown towards someone who is older or frail or ill is like welcoming God's presence? Why is that? Why do you think? So if each of us is in the image of God or has some spark of God within us, then each of us is an emissary of, or a vessel carrying the divine image. There's a piece of God within each of us. Yes, Jane, there's a piece of God is within each of us. Yes, to touch another person is to see the face of God. And we actually looked at that, I believe, last week when we looked at Jacob and Esau, and Jacob says, to see your face is to see the face of God, right? Be careful to honor the old, the frail, or the infirm who have forgotten their learning because of advanced years. This speaks to dementia. Remember, the broken fragments of the first set of tablets were also kept in the Ark of the Covenant alongside the new tablets. That's one of my favorite Talmudic agadot, that we are the sum total of all of our experiences, not just the last 2 years or 10 years or whenever illness, has taken over. And that's why by now, after 15 years, you've been to many, many funerals I've conducted. That while I don't skirt over an illness, I really focus on the person's life, because that, I think, they're not just their illness or what took them from us. They are a whole person. Lowering a person's value in his or her eyes, contributing to another's degradation in any way, these are crimes not only against the individual according to Jewish teaching, but affronts to God. Indeed, lowering oneself in one's own estimation is a failure to see oneself as what one really is, an image of God, worth everything and worthy of everything. What are the implications of all of this for adult children and the elderly or sick parents? First, the relationship of adult children to diminished parent cannot become that of inverted roles, not at least until it must. A parent who is old is still an adult. What life is taken away in terms of capabilities does not mean total incapacity until that state is truly reached. Whatever abilities remain which allow the aged to work, to do, to care for themselves and others must be given full rein. Any other attitude or ambience effaces the divine image and thereby destroys the life of the aged or the person who's sick. Second, children are also created in God's image. Their lives cannot be swallowed up by the crushing of individuality under the impossible burdens caused by parents. This was my rabbinic teacher in HUC in New York. It's as if you're welcoming a stranger. It may take some of your resources, but it's an act of compassion and tzedakah. And also the elder has wisdom you may not realize. Yes, this is a beautiful teaching. I have kept this with me for 24 years. Today is day 1 of 25. This is from a book he wrote, Michael Cherny. Honor the dignity of all, especially the aged, and afford a person independence as long as possible. Okay, so being present. So we talked about this before. So I just wanted to mention, that when we visit, being present, physically present is huge. I mean, sometimes it's just sitting in the room with them is of such great comfort to the person who's ill, who knows they're not alone. Even if they don't see you, they feel your presence, right? So how can we do this when we cannot be in a hospital or in a nursing home, let alone in the actual room of our loved one, holding hands, wiping foreheads, and offering prayers for healing? How do we do this? How do we help them to know that we're present? And how do we feel less helpless, right? If we cannot pray with them, can we pray for them? To what end? In other words, is there a difference between healing and being cured? And does it matter to whether or not we pray? So let's talk about the praying, because that is definitely something that we can do to feel like we're helping or bringing comfort, right? How can that help us to feel like we're being present in some way? Or does it? In the future, we could, this is, yes, Ruth, in the future, we could set up portable Zoom communications in nursing homes. Yes, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of older people, which is not only who has been getting the coronavirus by any stretch, but a lot of times, they rely on their children and grandchildren to help them with the technology. I'll hear this all the time. How are you? So-and-so, when I call, and they'll say, oh, my son set me up, on this, and now I can talk to them every day, or my grandchild, you know what I mean, or light Shabbat candles, or whatever it is. Prayer just matters, whether it's at the bedside or by the window or over the phone. I agree. When we pray Misha Berach, we pray for the renewal of body and the renewal of spirit. We don't necessarily pray that the person will be cured. We pray that, thank you everybody for that article. I got it now. Prayer can feel like there is something we can do. Loving kindness, meditation. Yes, Karen. Over Zoom, the privacy of our own. Yes, prayer matters. Something we can do to make a difference. Sometimes people say, I will pray for you. Sometimes that's welcome. Sometimes that's not. Yes. So when I am able to go into, well, even over the phone, the room of someone who's ill, or I always say, may I say a prayer with you or for you? I never just start, because a lot of times our Reformed people will say no, they don't want it. So, there's people on the shush list that we've been asked to put on the shush list, and there's people on the shush list that I want to remember to pray for, who don't want other people to know, you know what I mean, that they're being prayed for. There are many studies that show that prayer helps. And whether or not you believe it or not, right, that's up to you. That's a personal thing. Prayer empowers us. Yes, when people came, you know what I mean, when people come to visit, it is very comforting. Sometimes it's also exhausting, but yes, prayer helps. It helps to empower us. We feel less helpless. It also helps us to focus our own intentions and process our feelings. Yes, I love this. This one's iPhone number 613, like the number of commandments. Yeah, these are important things. I also think that, if there is somebody there in the nursing home or the hospital that's willing to bring the phone to our loved ones, whether it's FaceTime or just orally, I think that can make a huge difference. Okay, let's move on to another guiding principle for us that I spoke about before, which is choosing life. So this is going to get a little into the area of Well, you'll see. Okay. So this principle, of course, this comes from the book of Deuteronomy. And I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. We read this on Yom Kippur. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life if you and your offspring would live by loving the Lord your God and holding fast to him, for thereby you shall have life and long endure. So the question, that this brings up is, yes, somebody's telling the story of, there was a rabbi named Lynn Landsberg who had a traumatic brain injury from a horrific car accident when she slid on the ice, taking her son to religious school one Sunday morning. And she was one of the most dynamic human beings like there ever was. And she was in a coma for years. And there are 150 Psalms, 150 rabbis each picked one of those Psalms and recited it for her every day. So someone was reciting Psalm 1 every day, a different person 2, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the question that this raises is, choose life always, forever, how long? Jewish tradition affirms the sanctity of life and the precept that all must be done to preserve life. It also affirms that when there is no hope for a patient, impediments to death must not be created and a patient must be allowed to die in dignity. We should do our best to enhance the quality of life and to use whatever means modern science has placed at our disposal for this purpose, yet we need not invoke heroic measures to prolong life, nor should we hesitate to alleviate pain. But we cannot use a low quality of life as an excuse for hastening death. So based on this text, how might you characterize the Jewish view of life and illness and death? Yes, songs are prayers. No, having a DNR is not the opposite of this teaching. We're going to get to DNR, but having a DNR, that's do not resuscitate, but that's for when you're already, once you need to be resuscitated, meaning, you're already on death's door. So basically what this tells us is, we do everything we can to preserve life. But there comes a point at which, when it's clear that a person's going to die or that they're suffering terribly, et cetera, where we don't have to, where we are not obligated to employ heroic measures, that's what makes things like life support and feeding tubes and all kinds of, and things like that really kind of questionable to what extent those are heroic measures and to what extent those are complying with doing everything one can to preserve life. Paul is saying that a DNR is compatible with this. If there's no hope that someone could be able to live without artificial assistance, then we should let them go. If there is hope, keep trying to save them. Exactly. To live life to its fullest, yet when the time comes to accept with dignity and planning, a choice that allows death to come painlessly with love and dignity. Yes. Respecting it all, the whole process in each phase. Yes. So then I kind of threw a wrench in here. What do we do with a loved one with an illness like the coronavirus, where there's so little known even about the symptoms, which vary greatly from person to person? It has not been uncommon with the virus for people to be in comas for several weeks, some awakening and others passing. This particular thing is very, very difficult because we don't quite know exactly how it behaves. And, it's tough. Right. These days, the ventilator can save, but can also lead to death. And nobody's clear about when and under which circumstances. Very, very difficult. This is a difficult situation. Is it still okay to pray for healing when someone is struggling terribly, let's say on life support? Is it okay to pray for relief or death? So just hold those in your mind, because we're gonna now answer those questions, okay? This has to do with suffering. In Judaism, suffering itself is never seen as an independent good. Meaning, this is not like Christianity, where Jesus was the suffering servant, etc. That is not in Judaism. We do suffering is not a good in and of itself. It just isn't. As in the case of Rabbi Hanina ben Tariadon, he died a martyr's death at the hand of the Romans during the Hadrianic persecutions of the 2nd century. According to the story, the Romans burned him at the stake, wrapped in the parchment of the Torah scroll. They placed wet woolen rags around him in order to retard the flames to prolong his agony. He nonetheless refused to open his mouth and let the fire enter in order to hasten his death. It is better that the one who gives life take it away than for a person to bring harm upon himself. Yet when a Roman guard asks, Rabbi, if I increase the flame and remove the rags, will you guarantee me a life in the world to come? Rabbi Hanina answers yes, and the guard does so, based on the legal principle that one's legal agent is the legal equivalent of oneself, and an agent cannot legally perform a transgression. So at the outset, is Rabbi Hanina willing to hasten his own death? No. I'll just answer no, he's not, right? Why does he allow the guard to increase the flame and remove the rags? Why then does he do that? Death is inevitable. Okay. Maybe that's okay, so I'm going to get to yours in a second, Jane. That's the next one. So maybe removing the rags and increasing the flame is removing an impediment to an inevitable death. So that's a possibility, but he does it for the guard's well-being, because is the Roman guard's place in the world to come based on his willingness to end Hanina's suffering? It is, right? The guard is acting as an agent of the Roman Empire, not of himself. Since death is going to happen, allow it to happen. He prevents another from further suffering. Yes. Okay. Does this mean that the guard's actions are sanctioned by Hanina and Jewish law? Could be yes, could be no. Right? Could be yes, could be no. Okay. This is one of my favorite Talmudic stories. I probably say that about every other story. There's some great stuff in our tradition. One may pray for the release from suffering, although not for one's death, as in the case of Rabbi Judah Hanasi. They just call them Rabbi. When Rabbi is near death, his students gather to pray for his recovery. His maidservant, who at first is sympathetic to their efforts, soon realizes that Rabbi is beyond the point of healing. The time of his death is near, and the prayers serve only to prolong his suffering. She therefore prays that the Rabbi die quickly. When she sees that the students will not cease their own prayer, she throws a vessel from the roof of the house to the ground. The startling sound interrupts the prayers, and the Rabbi dies. So what happens in this story? What happens? You have the students praying for the Rabbi who's, deathly ill, right? And at first the maidservant's on board. She obviously loves him very much. So what does she do? Right, the prayers prolong his suffering in this case. In this case, right, and she prays that he die quickly, but the prayers to heal him are stronger than the ones for him to die. Maybe there are more of them, right? So what does she do to get them to stop praying? She goes to the roof and drops she removes the pediment to a dignified death, right? She drops like a vase or something from the roof. It comes crashing down, and that stops the prayers and the impediments. So I think what this teaches us is suffering, as I said, is not a value in and of itself in Judaism. It isn't a value. And, it's very difficult, as Jane had said before, how do we deal with the suffering of people during this virus? Let me just see if I can find what she wrote here. These days, the ventilator can save and can also lead to death. Doctors and we need to work through the need to make good decisions because we don't know much. This is very difficult. Yes, distraction, excellent. Are the students capable of prolonging the suffering? And they're not, they're not trying to prolong his suffering. They're trying to give him a chance to heal. But, it doesn't work. You have someone praying for death, someone praying for prolonged life or extending suffering, someone interrupting prayers. Aren't all of these an issue? Yes, it's a complex story. Every story is complex. You know what I mean? Like there's not a story in real life or in the Talmud that isn't complicated. They're all complicated. Everything's problematic. It just depends, right? The students did what they knew how to do. The maidservant did what she knew how to do. Who was more effective. All right, just in case you didn't know this, suicide is forbidden in Judaism since life and death are considered to be in God's hands. However, a person in great physical agony who is under great stress is no longer considered under Jewish law to be a free agent. Such a person is forgiven the act of suicide, and the usual funeral rites, which generally are forbidden in the case of suicide, are permitted to him. The classic example is King Saul, who fell on his sword at Mount Gilboa and is forgiven. So does Judaism allow for euthanasia or assisted suicide? No, it does not. Mental agony is considered the same as physical agony. It's considered that the person is severely ill and not capable of being their own agent. Therefore, they're forgiven. If they harm themselves. Mental agony is also considered like physical. Does Judaism allow for euthanasia or assisted suicide? It does not. Does Judaism allow for the withholding of life-saving medicines or treatments? I would say it does not until there's no chance, right, that the person will live. You don't have to do heroic, but you also have to try everything you can. If someone does commit suicide, how are they treated by Jewish law? They're treated as if they were mentally unwell and they weren't in their right mind when they took their lives, basically. So it's a compassionate response. We treat them the way as any other person who dies from any other illness. Once it is clear that your loved one is dying, is it okay to let them know that it's okay to Once it is clear that your loved one is dying, it is okay to let them know that it is okay to let go. Why? Because one may not delay the slowing of the dying process. Thus, if there is something that causes delay to the exit of the soul, such as your loved one's concern for leaving you, it is permitted to remove these because there's no direct act involved here. Only the removal of an obstacle, and pestering him to retain his soul will cause him greater suffering. What do you think of this principle, that it's not okay to delay the slowing of the drying process? Right, if someone's in hospice, antibiotics and other meds are withheld, isn't that okay? Yes, but they don't withhold meds that are going to cause the person suffering. In other words, if their lungs are filling with fluid and they're going to feel like they're choking to death, they don't stop the diuretic. You know what I mean? They may stop antibiotics and other meds, but not something that's going to cause like suffering, but yes, they do. Yes, you can do that. Of course. Yes, but they mitigate the pain. Exactly. Do Judaism's views on these issues feel compassionate to you or not? Exactly. Thank you, Alice. Exactly. They feel compassionate and not. That's exactly. I love that answer. That's exactly the right answer. These are very difficult things. I don't know of a single religion or religious body, even Reform Judaism, that comes out and says it's okay for someone to take their life or for you to assist someone to take their life. It's just, all of our religions are about choosing life. So it's just maybe some of the Eastern ones where the goal is to kind of transmutate to a higher level of consciousness or something, but none of them, none of us are like, yes, it's okay to take your life. No, none. All right, let's just talk quickly about, let me see. Yes, this is very compassionate. It's interesting and good that suicide is, by definitions, means there was an unbearable physical or mental pain or distress. Exactly. It has to be understood in the context of the person's life. Exactly. Just also remember, and this, sometimes people don't realize this, sometimes it's very, sometimes being very physically ill for a long time can cause severe, severe depression. And a person can want to die even though there is a chance that they can be saved, but they just can't see it in their distress, right? In their depressed state. So it's, you know, that's why quality of life is not considered an adequate reason to end a life, because there's a chance that that could turn around. And some of you have dealt with that not even all that long ago, and we've talked that through. Back to the medical directive, it's important. Okay, this is Debbie, the lawyer, the estate lawyer. It's important to honor the wishes of the dying person above all else. Very important to have these hard conversations. Debbie, did you read ahead, Debbie, with family members before they are too ill, and encourage all adults to have medical directives, but a DNR put into place when one is well. Exactly. So here's, I think Linda and Debbie read ahead. Judaism, I'm just going to read through this. Judaism permits and encourages durable powers of attorney and advanced directives and DNRs. Since self-determination is the single greatest predictor of a good death, which is why making your wishes known and not leaving these decisions to your loved ones is a mitzvah. If you have not done these things, think about why that might be. That's rhetorical. I'm not asking you to tell me that now. Sometimes people think that talking about their death and what they want will hasten it, but there's no evidence that this is so. If you're afraid, please come talk to me and we can explore together why this is. Okay, so now we have a little bit of something else that happens that's difficult. Different families deal differently with how much to disclose to loved ones about the reality of their illness. And I get this all the time. You know, someone will call me and say, you know, so-and-so, you know, my father has this, this, and this, but he doesn't know that. You know, so when you call, be sure you don't mention that. You know, he only knows this. So there's no right or wrong way to handle diagnostic disclosure, which is why the above is encouraged when a person is well, right? This is what Debbie's saying. These conversations, it's very important to have them when you're well, when it's, you know, when you're not thinking about, you know, when it's far away. Different families will interpret Jewish law differently vis-a-vis what constitutes sustaining life versus prolonging life. What's an extraordinary heroic measure? Alleviating pain versus hastening death. Even within families, I should say especially within families, there's not always agreement. What happens when this is a case and there is no advance directive? You know, you're avsaluchis, which is bleep out of luck. You know what I mean? That is often when I get called in, you know, just to try to help, you know, figure this out. But if the person hasn't made known what they want, you know, then you don't always, you know, you have one child that is absolutely certain that, you know, they should not, you know, remove life support because they don't want their, you know, their mother to suffer. And you have another one who says absolutely not. You know, we need to give mom every possible chance, you know, so, you know, these are really hard things. So I just encourage you, if you won't do it for yourself, think about your children or whoever the executors or trustees of your estate are, or all that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. Rituals around death and dying. Okay. Contrary to popular belief, there is a final confession in Judaism. It's called the vidui. These are the same, we say vidui like 20 times during the high holidays. right? For the sin I have committed against you by doing this. For the sin I have committed against you of doing that. By the sin I have committed against you of doing this and doing that, right? So if the patient or family would like, when death is imminent, a clergy person can be called in, or the following prayer may be recited with the patient on his or her behalf. And this is the exact prayer that I say. Well, I don't usually read it. I usually just say it in my own words. But my God and God of all who have gone before me, author of life and death, I turn to you in trust. So you're saying this on behalf of your loved one who's dying. Although I pray for life and health, I know that I am mortal. If my life must soon come to an end, let me die, I pray, at peace. If only my hands were clean and my soul pure. I confess that I have committed sins and left much undone, yet I know also the good that I did or tried to do. May my acts of goodness give meaning to my life, and may my errors be forgiven. Protector for the bereaved and the helpless, watch over my loved ones. Into your hand I commit my spirit. Redeem it, O God of mercy and truth. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And after death, one recites Baruch Dayan HaEmet, blessed be the judge of truth. So does this prayer make sense to you, or does it surprise you? Never knew about this prayer. Yes. Because it addresses, that for the most part, we've done a lot of good things in our lives, but there are still things we've left undone. And there are still things that we may feel sorry for. And most of all, we're worried about someone watching our loved ones. So we don't do this prayer together on the high holidays. This is literally the deathbed confessional prayer. But we do a vidui, like for the death, for the sin I've committed against you by doing this, for the sin I've committed against you by doing that. Because don't forget that Yom Kippur, we are enacting the moment before death. We wear white as if in shrouds. We don't eat, we don't drink, we don't bathe, we don't engage in intimacy, we don't. We come as close to God as possible, as close to the brink of death as possible. So Jesus said, into your hand I commend my spirit on the cross. Well, guess where Rabbi Joshua got it from? That's what Jesus's name was, Rabbi Joshua. Guess where he got it from? Huh? That's where he got it from. Into your hand I commit my spirit. Well, there you go. It would definitely help you let go if you were there. I bet it did, Barbara. I'm so glad it helped you. Can there be surrogate designated to say the prayer? Sure, of course. I mean, now I've given it to you. I mean, if you can find, here's the tricky thing with it though. You have to really have a good sense that the person is really at the end. Because I once was called to the bedside of somebody. It was one of our beloved funeral directors in Baltimore. He wasn't my congregant, but I had a special relationship with him. And I went to the hospital and I did the bidui. And guess what? He turned around and he recovered. And from then on, I was like the rabbi of choice for doing bidui, because everybody thought if I went to do the bidui that they would get well. But so you have to, yes, we led you for the Shema when she took her last breath. Yes, that's right, Dorianne, we were there. But with Mom too, I remember there were several times when we thought it was the end and it wasn't quite. You just don't know. You also don't want to take away their hope. So you have to figure it out. My sister-in-law had this before she died. My brother said she really responded positively. An additional benefit of hospice is how the nurse prepares the family for death, including its signs, symptoms, and sounds. Yes. If you're in the presence of people who are dying enough, Mark's saying, I remember Cantor Flax recited this when he was at the deathbed of a friend, and it was very powerful and soothing. Yes, I think it is. Yes, while you were at the, yes, I get it. Yes, usually, just having been at the bedside of many dead people, I can usually tell, like kind of how it's going. But that doesn't mean I always get it right. And that doesn't mean that the nurses always get it right. You never really know 100%. There's no way. Most of the time I hear could be days, could be weeks, could be months. That's what I usually hear. What happens in the case of a coronavirus patient when it's not possible to be with the person at their bedside or for the family to gather? Well, we talked about, you sent me the article, Nina posted it from the nurse who does vidui with Jewish patients, which is a beautiful thing. I think I read the guy wasn't even Jewish. I'm not 100% sure. Oh my God, I have to rush through. Okay. All right, I'm not going to go. These are exactly what we do for Shiva and Mourning. I'm going to pass through this very quickly so we can get, the nurse in the article is an Orthodox Jew. Okay, thank you very much, Barbara. All right, I just wanted to say two things about the laws of death, mourning, and Shiva, maybe more than two things, but there are two principles at work when in the Jewish laws of mourning, and there are two principles. One is kavod hamet, respect for the dead. The other is nichum avelim, comforting the mourners. Those are the only two principles, right? There's no principle to make great uncle, John, who wants this and that and that, feel okay about it, right? The two principles are respecting, honoring the dead, respecting the dead, and comforting the mourners. So that, you got to keep your eye on the prize. So anyway, and the different times of the periods of mourning are designed so that, you have the most community around you at the most intense periods of mourning, and then it less so as time goes on. So you'll have to look at this later. I listed, it's really a lot. I listed Shiva, Shloshim, Kaddish, Yortzeit, Yisker, etc. So we'll send this out, and you'll just have to read it on your own. Because we just don't, if we have time, I'll come back to it. How does that sound? Okay. Do Jews believe in an afterlife? This is really where I wanted to go. Okay. So the answer is yes and no. Okay, so there are many different beliefs in Judaism, and you can believe what you want. They also sort of progress. So in the Bible, there is not a view of the afterlife. There's from dust to dust, basically dust to dust and ashes to ashes. Like, this is your one life. So here's just some text. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Okay. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat until you return to the ground, for from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So that this principle is that this is the one life we get, right? Live it the best you can every day, as meaningfully, as filled with loving kindness and generosity as you can, as filled with goodness as you can, because this is the life that you have. And then it tells you both man and beast go to the same place. Both came from the dust and both return to the dust. Who knows if a man's life breath does rise upward, and if a beast's breath does sink down to the ground, right? Meaning all living things. We have no evidence, the Bible is saying that, that our souls go up and, other creatures go back to the earth. Who placed the earth in his charge? Who ordered the entire world? If he but intends it, meaning God, he can call back his spirit and breath. All flesh would at once expire and mankind return to the dust. So according to the biblical texts, I'm going to ask and answer my own questions. Do Jews believe in an afterlife? Not according to the biblical text, right? Then what is our immortality? And I'll answer the questions. A very beloved reading for the Kaddish from the Old Union Prayer Book. They still live on earth in the acts of goodness they performed and in the hearts of those who cherish their memories. So how do we live on? What's our immortality according to the Bible? What is it? What is our immortality? Where do we remain? In the hearts of our loved ones. Good. In memories, in the lessons we leave behind, and the impact we had on others, in our children, in our acts of loving kindness. Exactly. That's what this is all saying. We're going to look at the thing with the soul. That's lovely. Karen is saying that when she was with her dad via FaceTime when he was in hospice and dying, she focused on telling him what she valued about him, how he made a difference in her life, how the things that he taught me or they experienced together help her daily and helped her become the person she is. So even on his deathbed, he beamed. And he reminded her, or it also reminded her, that her dad is always with her in memories, daily actions, and the wisdom she uses in her life. It comforted both of them, raising both of them out of their misery in a way that focused on how his life continues in and through me and what I teach my children. Yes, we're going to get to the soul, Jay. We're going to get to the soul. We're only gone in the physical sense. We're always there in spirit. Yes, we are going to get to the soul. Okay. Let's go with this. The next biblical concept, believe it or not, is resurrection. Again, this is the body. Yes. Okay. Oh, let your dead revive. Let corpses arise. Awake and shout for joy, you who dwell in the dust. For your dew is like the dew on fresh growth. You make the land of the shades come to life, right? This is God can revive the dead. And this is a beautiful, this is the story of Ezekiel in the valley of the dry bones. The hand of the Lord came upon me. He took me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me down in the valley. It was full of bones. He led me all around them. There were very many of them spread over the valley, and they were very dry. He said to me, O mortal, can these bones live again? I replied, O Lord God, only you know. And he said to me, prophesy over these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus said the Lord God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live again. That breath of God, that animating spirit, that's the soul. I will lay sinews upon you and cover you with flesh and form skin over you, and I will put breath into you, and you shall live again, and you shall know that I am the Lord. I prophesied as I had been commanded, and while I was prophesying, suddenly there was a sound of rattling, and the bones came together, bone to matching bone. I looked, and there were sinews on them, and flesh had grown, and skin had formed over them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, O mortal. Say to the breath, thus saith the Lord God, come, O breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live again. I prophesied as he commanded me. The breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast multitude. And it goes on, that God puts their bodies back together and then breathes their souls, the breath of life, back into them, and they're animated. And Daniel, in the book of Daniel, we have the same thing. Many of those that sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to eternal life, others to reproaches or everlasting abhorrence. So how do you feel about this belief? First of all, did you know there was belief in resurrection of the dead in Judaism? Yes, no, maybe. Yeah, no, okay. All right, the world to come. All right, I'm going to talk. Most of you did not know about the resurrection of the dead. That's supposed to happen when the Messiah comes. There's this thing called Gilgul Nefashot, where wherever we're buried, we all roll in underground tunnels to Jerusalem. And then when the Messiah comes, we're all, put together and reanimated with our souls and live again. In the world to come, so this idea comes later in the Talmud. The world to come is Olam Haba. So much for social distancing. Ha ha ha. Very cute. The Talmud contains the Talmud contains many scattered descriptions of what this world to come looks like. So I'm going to give you some of them. For some of them, the world to come. Okay. I'm just going to go through all of them. So the world to come, Olam Haba, is the most ubiquitous Jewish idea related to the end of days. It appears in early rabbinic sources as the ultimate reward of the individual Jew and possibly the righteous Gentile. The Talmud contains scattered descriptions of the world to come, sometimes comparing it to spiritual things such as the study of Torah, other times comparing it to physical pleasures such as sex. That's why most Jews don't have cremation, because of Olam Haba, exactly. Olam Haba and this resurrection of the dead. That's most, but not all. You have to believe this in order for that to matter to you. However, not surprisingly, it is not obvious what exactly the world to come is and when it will exist. According to Nachmanides, among others, the world to come is the era that will be ushered in by the resurrection of the dead, the world that will be enjoyed by the righteous who have merited additional life. Reform Judaism believes in a messianic era. That's a time when through all of our good deeds we'll hasten an era of peace for all, Jews and non-Jews alike. According to Maimonides, the world to come refers to a time even beyond the world of the resurrected. He believes that the resurrected will eventually die a second death, at which point the souls of the righteous will enjoy a spiritual bodily existence in the presence of God. So here you already have like a separation of body and soul. Still, in other sources, the world to come refers to the world inhabited by the righteous immediately following death, heaven or Gan Eden. In this view, the world to come exists now in some parallel universe. And there's a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua on whether the world to come is reserved for Jews or whether this blissful state is the reward of Gentiles as well. Rabbi Joshua holds that the righteous of all people have a share in the world to come, and this is the official view of Judaism. So everybody has that. Okay, Jay, I hope you're still on. I'm going so fast. I'm sorry. I told you there was a lot. Okay, the immortality of the soul, right? You were talking about the soul, Jay Lazier. Okay, the Talmud and later texts. So this tells us that there are three parts. This is another one of my favorite. There are three partners in a person: the Holy One of Blessing, their father, and their mother. Their father supplies the semen of the white substance, out of which are formed the child's bones, sinews, nails, the brain in their head, and the white in their eye. Their mother supplies the semen of the red substance, out of which is formed their skin, flesh, hair, blood, and the black of their eye. And the Holy One of Blessing gives them breath and a soul and a face, and seeing and hearing and speaking and walking and understanding, and the mind. When one's time of death approaches, the Holy One of Blessing removes that part, right, the soul, and leaves the parts of the father and mother before them. So here you have, the differentiation, right? That the soul can live eternally. So, and here's the body alone dies, the soul is immortal. The essential nature of matter is its property of always being able to assume a new form. So, here's another one. I'll try to answer your question in a minute, Victoria, about Pikuach Nefesh. An act done in the matter described is called knowledge, to indicate that by doing acts in this manner, namely with the intention of pleasing God, does man attain his purpose, namely immortality of the soul. So here we see that how does your soul gain immortality? Because you do mitzvot, like you do good deeds. And believe it or not, that's where this custom of saying Kaddish for someone, for a loved one, for either 11 months or a year comes from. There's this idea in traditional Judaism that at the moment of death, the soul leaves the body, but it hovers over the body in sort of a in-between liminal state, and that each day when Kaddish is recited, the soul is lifted a little higher and higher and higher, so that at the end of this first 11 or 12 months of mourning, it's redeemed to heaven or Olam Haba or whatever. Okay, and I wanted to just show you, I'm doing this quickly, and then I'll get back to your questions in our liturgy. Okay, so the Givurot, okay. Mechalkel chayim bechesed, mechaye hakol berachamim rabim, right? The traditional is, you are mighty Adonai, you revive the dead. You sustain life through love, reviving the dead through great compassion, supporting the falling, healing the sick, freeing the captive, keeping the faith with those who sleep in the dust. Who is like you, source of mighty acts? Who resembles you, a sovereign who takes and gives life, causing deliverance to spring up and faithfully reviving that which is dead? Blessed are you, Adonai, who revives the dead. You are mighty, Adonai, you give life to all. And then you see that our version doesn't say anything about reviving the dead. Yes, Elizabeth says her granddaughter says the soul is in your blood. That's what it says in Torah. And we've studied that in the book of Leviticus. The nefesh, the soul is in the blood. That's why the blood belongs to God. You sustain life. So this is ours. You sustain life through love, giving life to all. Then everything's the same. Who resembles you, a sovereign who takes and gives life, causing deliverance to spring up and faithfully giving life to all? Blessed are you who gives life to all. What's the difference between the two versions? Okay, so in the traditional, right, there's a direct reference to God's reviving the dead. I mean, it's all through, right? That there's a right. We don't have reviving the dead. Why? The early reformers took it out of the prayer book because they took out anything that was irrational or kind of smacked of mysticism, that didn't comport with their kind of intellectual understanding of our tradition. No reviving the dead, no resurrection, exactly. But that's why the Reform movement made the switch. But the new prayer book has both. Mishkan Tefillah has both versions, so you can do one or the other. Given all we've learned today, do you think it might be time to reclaim the traditional meaning of the prayer? That God gives life, but also revives the dead. Sorry, I have to go. No problem. Please do another Zoom on this. Yeah, I know. I feel like I can't breathe. Okay. And this last one is a poem about how, so I think it may be time to revive it, or at least to give people the chance, the choice to say, God who gives life to all, or having the two options. Exactly. I just don't think we know that there are two options in there without telling, yes, that's the whole point. Hovering soul after death, that is conservative and Orthodox. That's not Reform. That's conservative and Orthodox. That's why cremation is so frowned upon. In Reform Judaism, I believe the soul leaves the body at the moment of death. And so, however as long as the vessel of the soul, the body, returns to the earth, whether it's through cremation or through or through burial, I think it's okay. But if you believe that the soul hovers over the body and, needs to be redeemed, I mean, there's this belief by more traditional Jews that cremation causes the soul to remain sort of in this limbo or purgatory, that it never enters heaven. So this is about the Gilgul Nefashot, when I told you about how the bodies roll to back to Jerusalem when the Messiah comes. It says one does not travel to Jerusalem, one returns. One ascends, right? And so, you can read that. I want to just answer a few of these questions. There's a lot of questions in here and I can't. Okay, Pikuach Nefesh. So somebody is asking about, Pikuach Nefesh is the principle of saving a life. So someone's asking about organ donation. Yes, Reform and conservative Jews, absolutely organ donation is okay. Anytime it's to save a life, it's absolutely allowed. Even, there was an article in the Jewish News about whether or not it's okay to do autopsies during this time if someone dies from the coronavirus. And the traditional view is you can only do it if you know that a specific person is going to be helped from the knowledge that's derived, like a specific person. But we say, meaning Reform Jews say, and even conservative, that it's okay if any people are going to benefit from the knowledge that is derived. I said, look, there's too much at stake here not to give the doctors and the scientists as much information as they can get to try to help all of us. So, So, but yes, organ donation, absolutely, absolutely okay, 100%. But the soul would have already left. Actually, I'm trying to think. With organ donation, I think they have a limited, very limited time when they can take the organs from the body. Um, either when you're dying or even once you die, but it's a very small window. Gehinnom and paradise. Okay, paradise is Gan Eden, so that's the same, Paul, as like Olam Haba, the world to come. There's lots of different beliefs. Is it a parallel universe? Is it some sort of heaven? Is it some state where you're sitting at the feet of God studying Torah? Is it somewhere where you're having sex and pleasure all the time? I mean, there's lots and lots of different views. The Gehinnom, that's the valley of, I think it's like the Valley of the Dead. That's in Israel. Again, where the bodies are waiting, to be resurrected when the Messiah comes. So there are all kinds of, there's Sheol, which is like purgatory. There's lots of different. We could not possibly do it all. It's already 117. But, and we didn't even go through this, where is it? This page 9, about all the laws of death and mourning. But we have run out of time. So if you can believe, this was already our 5th class. We have 2 classes to go. So I look forward to seeing everybody next week at noon, or tomorrow at 4 Torah study, or Friday night at 6:30 for services, or Saturday morning for Torah service, Saturday services at 10:30, etc., etc., etc. And I hope all of you were able to be on the Nefesh Mountain concert last night, because that was truly uplifting and inspiring and just beautiful, really beyond anything I've experienced in quite a while. So anyway.